Hello there, and welcome to another episode of All You Need to Know with your host, Saranya Gopinath. How are you doing today? For decades now, we've seen movies and books talk about a wonderful sci fi future with AI in it. Now, irrespective of wherever the plot went from there, it all had this one starting point, which was that you could outsource all your mundane tasks to this ever accepting, cheery bot. You just had to give the instruction, and the bot would scurry away and do everything boring in your life, whether it was folding clothes or, doing your homework. Now, being the youngest in the household, my big brother certainly thought he already lived in that future because he had his very own dedicated bot, me. But now, with agentic browsers, we are entering a future where potentially those bots are available to everyone and not just the age advantaged. Anna, I'm looking at you. Let's get started. So, before we get into agents and where they fit in, let's do a quick recap of the story so far. So far, we've had the LLMs, the chat GPTs and Claudes of the world. They were models that you could interact with, ask questions, and they would give you answers. You still had to give detailed instructions, and what they were performing is individual actions, not complete tasks. With agents, however, we have a couple of functions above models where they are able to complete full activities without your instructions. And this is the key part, because even with LLMs, you could create a workflow to do multiple activities one after the other. But with agents, when you do a complete task, they are able to reason and act and interact with the environment without your participation. Let's explain it this way. With an LLM or a model, you could ask it, what's the price of a McDonald's burger? It would possibly look it up, search it on the web, or think about it and get back to you. But with an agent, you can potentially say, have a burger delivered to my home at lunchtime, and it will do all the activities involved to make that happen without your active instructions. Now, also, before we go ahead, I want to give you the context that I'm using the term AI agent very broadly here. It would involve what we know as either bots, assistants, and agents. Bots are effectively your really simple autonomous tasks, like a chatbot where it knows it's reading from a script, it's responding to you, and that's about it. Assistants, on the other hand, respond to requests or prompts and can analyze and recommend actions where the user makes the decisions, like scheduling mails, scheduling meetings, or drafting emails. Agents can perform complete tasks with multiple steps, learning and taking decisions independently, like a self-driving car or a financial AI which makes investments on your behalf. As you can see, this large term agents with all of these multiple facets, whether it's bots, assistants, or agents themselves, on the spectrum are actually heading towards where we want to be, which is that completely autonomous world where we give an instruction and they go perform it and come back. There are several organizations already working in this space of creating AI agents for many different functions. Like, obviously, there are the big techs like the Microsoft, Google, IBMs of the world, and even more specialized companies like LangChain, Lindy, and Lysa. But where we are seeing an inflection point is these agents now becoming packaged within browsers so that all of us can experience the agentic effect. Welcome to the new age browser and the new age browser wars. Hint, these browser wars are not just between the agents, but we'll get to that in just a bit. Before we go ahead, let's understand how the agents and browsers come together and where they finally meet. Let's break down the components of an agent for this, and then you'll see where it fits in. So for an agent, it needs to interact, perceive, reason, and act. Let's walk through that. So first, it needs to interact with you, right? It needs to have some interface where you are giving it instructions or making the requests. This can be the model, interface, or any other platform. If it's an interface that already has some additional knowledge about you and your preferences, even better. The next step after interaction is the perceiving, which is the context sharing. Now, this is where you include knowledge retrieval and tools both, right? Let's use perceive in a larger umbrella where it could be RAG, knowledge retrieval, or connectors with tools through APIs or other connectors like MCP, wherever you need to go. To understand what perceive is, which is the context giving, Let's take the McDonald's example. So let's say when you tell an agent to place an order for a McDonald's burger to be delivered to you, the first thing it needs to do is look up your home address, look up your calendar to understand when is your lunchtime, understand where is the closest McDonald's, and then get your payment details for checkout, right? Now, these are 4 different sources of knowledge that the agent needs to have access to, which it needs to perceive. Either you give it access to that knowledge or you give it a connector access by which it can go fetch that knowledge, whatever is the case. But this perception or that context availability is a major part for the agent to be able to do what you want it to do. Then, of course, is the very important reasoning, where it's able to take all of this information, like understand what it needs to pull out from where, have access to it, then think about it, and then finally act, which is executing all of these steps, right? So, interface, which is instructions, perceive, which is giving information context, reason, for it to be able to understand what needs to be pulled from where and actually discuss a plan, and then act, which is actually executing that plan. Right? With me so far? Now, when you put all of this together, is when you realize that browsers are the perfect tools to have all of these things built in. And then you will understand why these big AI companies are tripping themselves over to release browsers. Because a browser is that real estate which has the perfect, sticky, omnipresent tool in your life. Let's look through this, right? Now, through the day, for the different activities you want, you can go model shopping. Like for creative tasks, you may go to ChatGPT. For analytical tasks, you may go to Claude, and so on and so forth. But you don't really shop around for browsers. You possibly installed your browser when you first set up your laptop and haven't looked back since. It's the first thing that you open when you start your day to look at your mail, your calendar, and is the last thing you look at night. That is a major amount of real estate and mind space that the browser enjoys. It takes up 70% of your day potentially. AI companies are hoping that by them being your default browser, they can then get complete context, help in all of your tasks, and create a completely personalized assistant that never budges from your device. Because with the agents built in, you have all the context accessible, whether it's your calendar, your preferred website, and so on. You have the interface where you can ask it questions, and then the model built in can do the reasoning and actually execute whatever you needed to do. Clearly, this is a browser set up to be much more effective than I ever was. Oh, sorry, enough. Now let's get to the browsers themselves. We've seen a bunch of agentic browsers be released, right from Opera's, Arc's, everybody's coming out with their own. But I tried 2 of the biggest names in the browser game, so you don't have to. I tried out Comet and Atlas. Comet, of course, is the one launched by Perplexity. They had a limited launch back in July 2025, did full-scale launch on 4th October. And Atlas, of course, is by OpenAI, which was launched on 21st October. I gave them each 2 tasks. One was a simple shopping task to buy a pair of blue shoes, and the second was to generate transcripts for my YouTube videos. In this video, I'm not going to go into the details of my entire browser experience because I think it'll make it much longer and it's a much more detailed rant. But I'll give you a summary for now and we'll do a more detailed video of the browsers themselves later. But the short version is we are not in a perfect agent world yet. Comet does things quick and easy, but it's sometimes incomplete. And it actually doesn't, nudge you for further instructions or kind of offer that it is incomplete. It just says, done, here you go, let's move on. Atlas, on the other hand, is ready to churn the ocean. It is super detailed. It asks a whole bunch of questions, gets into a lot of gyan, gives a lot of context, and it definitely has better results as such most of the time. But we will get into that a little bit. I'll try to leave the link for the video of the deep dive of the browsers themselves in the description below. But short verdict is this, right? I'm not completely convinced by either browser yet. To be fair, maybe there are other tasks that you need to try out and to explore to get a sense of different experiences. For example, a friend of mine was using Comet and he was able to get Comet to fill out some really long, tedious form for him. And it really worked very well, which is awesome. So I think you need to explore a little bit, see what works for you, maybe give better instructions to better tasks. I don't know, but there's a little bit of space to go as far as I'm concerned, but would love to know your experiences from using these browsers. Please do share your thoughts and share maybe the craziest thing you got the browser to do. That'd be so fun to share. Now, with this, let's get into the policy deep dive. Unfortunately, it's not one of my videos until I tell you all that can go wrong with something like this. Sorry about that, but let's do this. It'll give you a good sense of where the agentic browser world needs to improve and how it needs to go, right? So first things first, of course, is the liability piece, right? We've discussed this in the past, and I think we kind of have a vocabulary around this with things like self-driving cars and, those pieces. We've touched upon this. But effectively, you're going to be thinking about what happens if the agent glitches. Let's say, for example, you ask it to buy a pair of shoes and it places an order for 10 pairs of shoes instead of one. Are you liable to pay for it? I mean, certainly Perplexity or OpenAI aren't going to be picking up the bill. So what happens then? What's the liability framework? While there are different ways in which we can look at this, for example, we can break it down and say that obviously liability framework can be different for if it is something small like, shoe shopping, or maybe a slightly different framework if there is booking glitches, because then there is like a cost of, somebody else not getting the booking and so on and so forth. So maybe like thinking about it as a whole of agent glitches is going to be a little difficult to solve. Breaking it down into the tasks and the consequences will be better. The EU AI Act definitely took a version of that framework where you try to break down tasks and talk about high risk systems accountability and low risk systems accountability. So maybe something like that will be useful when we try to address the liability question as far as AI agents are concerned. The next point is, of course, privacy and data access. So if we want agents to start doing things like ordering food or booking flights, it obviously has to have access to a lot of our personal data. To be fair, each browser does put across different disclosures as to what they do with your data, whether they use it for training purposes, whether they leave it on your system, which of the data sets they touch for what reasons, and so on and so forth. It's not like they're completely opaque about it. But nonetheless, this is a substantial amount of your data, of your private data, that they are going to have access to, whether it is calendar, payment data, so on and so forth. Before we go further, I do want to take a second to acknowledge your annoyance. I completely understand how frustrating it is when there is literally a bot out there that is saying, I will do all your annoying work for you. And privacy lawyers like me jump in and say, hey, but your data, I completely get it. In a perfect world, if I could trade all of my data for complete convenience without any consequences, I would totally do it. I get your frustration. I acknowledge, I apologize. No solutions here, but let's move on. Because the next concern is a really important one, and I want you guys to stay with me. And it's a really interesting one when you look at the world of agents. It's about access and content. Okay, so one end of the spectrum is when you say that the bot should not be the one controlling what choices it makes for you. Let me explain. So the bot will be controlling the preferential choices it makes. Let's go back to the buying blue shoes instance. The agent will have to decide which websites it shortlists and shows you. It can't show you the entire internet. If you know which websites you're going to and you can go yourself, you really don't need the bot. But what ends up happening is that the bot will decide of like the 50 stores, which ones to shortlist and show you, depending upon what it thinks it's most appropriate for your needs. But what ends up happening as a result is that the bot is making choices on your behalf. Now, with your browser being your access point to the internet, the agent potentially influences your view of the internet and your actions on it. This is potentially a major disproportionate influence and can lead to competition and antitrust concerns, because it can control like the shop apps you go to, the news you see, your worldview. So that is one end of the spectrum where the agent is going to have a sense of all of the websites and can control what you see and what you don't see. But curiously, the flip concern is also coming up, which brings us to the recent skirmishes between Comet and Amazon, which is basically where the browser wars take on a whole new meaning and you realize the wars are not just between the browsers. Let's start from the beginning. Earlier this month, Amazon shared that it had banned Comet's agents from accessing its page. Amazon sends a cease and desist letter to Perplexity to stop Comet's agents from browsing on the Amazon page. This letter says that Amazon does not want to participate in the agentic experience of third parties, and it says that in spite of repeated communication to Perplexity saying this, that they do not want to be browsed upon, Perplexity is not respecting their wishes. Amazon's reasoning is that they have a curated specific shopping experience for its customers, which the agents then bypass. Instead of putting in the checks to not have agents browse their page, Comet has made changes that evade identification by Amazon's bot search process such that it is not caught out. Amazon's pages are not able to detect when Comet's bots hit the page. There is also the concern stated that Comet ends up having access to customer passwords, security keys, shopping history, etc., while disclaiming responsibility for data security. So Amazon is pissed. But Perplexity, not to be outdone, came out with a blog post on November 4th titled "Bullying is Not Innovation." They are stating that Amazon's actions are a threat to user choice and that Perplexity will not be intimidated. I quote, they say in the blog post, "Bullying is when large corporations use legal threats and intimidation to block innovation and make life worse for people." In this background to all of this is also the fact that Amazon is developing its own shopping assistants and AI-driven experiences. Major drama. So, what is the issue here? A non-trivial part of where Amazon is coming from and where Perplexity is not wrong at all is ads. Ask any of your friends from the marketing industry and they will tell you how traditional SEOs and ad strategy have gone for a complete toss. With AI-generated answers, nobody goes to the list of Google search pages anymore. I bet you don't remember the last time you've done that. With agents in the mix, however, things get a tad more complicated. If you don't go to the website at all, how will you view the ads that have been placed on the website? The ones that suggest purchases, the ones that state that this is the top reviewed product, or the ones which shoppers like you have also liked. The whole works. Who is going to see all of that? And more importantly, how are they going to be able to influence you? Now, there is a whole wormhole down this path where marketers are getting into deep research, revisiting persuasion science, the whole shebang. It's super interesting. There's definitely, a mind bend in rethinking the way the internet works, the way ads work, the way you are suggested products, the way you discover. It's a whole new world. And it's really interesting. But needless to say, this is a space that is going to get flipped on its head. And agents are like the first driver of that. And Amazon is not wrong in being really concerned about how it leaves the shopping experience that they have owned and created this entire time. Phew! Okay, that was a lot. That is a lot of detailing. So, where does this leave the whole browser story, right? And what does this take the story from here? Chrome and Safari still run about 80% of the browser market. And that's not going to change in a hurry. These are juggernauts, and for all the reasons I stated before, browsers are inherently a sticky product. But undeniably, your experience of browsing the internet is going to change. When you are accessing your phone from your watch or your glasses, when you are shopping through an agent, when you are accessing your notes app from your fridge, you need to rethink the world and the way in which you perceive the internet. I don't have any predictions here, but what I do like as a user is the fact that the next version of the internet is going to be intent-driven rather than real estate driven. At least that's what I hope it's going to be. But what's going to happen is that the one who influences your choices then becomes the one through whom you perceive the world. That wasn't the way we saw it before, but that stands to change. Like your choice of browser may decide your worldview, the news you see. That's really interesting. So I guess it stands to see whether the agent is controlled by you or we have to wait and see where it goes. But another important question is, if you aren't actually going through the web pages yourself and you yourself aren't doing the browsing, is browser even the real term anymore? That's the real question. With that, I will sign off. Please let me know your thoughts about this episode. Most of the time is spent in analysis paralysis and figuring out the next topic. So if you want to share something that interests you more than the next, do let me know. It will be super helpful to me. If you want to do something on the marketing piece, that will be super interesting. Do let me know if I should double down on that. But with that, I will sign off and I will catch you soon on another episode of All You Need to Know. Thank you so very much. Share this with a friend. Take care. Bye.